Welcome to TezTalks Radio. I am your host, Marissa Trew. Apologies for having a bit of a sore throat today, so I sound a little bit more hoarse. But joining me once again on the show is Victoria West. So to any newcomers on the show, Victoria is an activist, a storyteller, a photographer, and host of fellow Tezos ecosystem show, TezTalks. Victoria was also instrumental as a curator for the Tezos ecosystem in the Subjective Art Festival, which was held at the end of September, in partnership with some of Web3 art world's leading partners and supported by our very own Tezos Commons. So welcome back, Victoria. How are you today?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
So firstly, I'd love for you to give us a primer on what exactly Subjective NYC is and how you came to get involved.
So Subjective was a 3-day art fair in New York City. It was held at Loom Studios, which is an immersive space, but also they have I think they have 6 floors total, where they have a lot of different digital art installations and some physical ones. So I had worked with them in the spring when we did the Stellar Tezos event there during NFT NYC. And my friend Flexosaurus, Lou, he was actually he was there at the event and was part of it. And he had been speaking to some of the guys that run it, Doten, who owns it. And they were planning Subjective for the first time. And he was telling me about it, and I thought it was a really good idea. I thought it was something that would be valuable. It was really like grassroots. I really like what those guys are doing. And in my last experience there, having been to a lot of different venues in New York, I felt like Loom so far has been the most impactful for me. The way that you see the art, seeing people who are not part of this space or, even part of the art world really being immersed in it and being interested in it. I feel like it's such a good way to like outreach and bring people in. So I spoke to Alex at Tezos Commons, and he agreed that this was something of value. And I thought Tezos and Tezos artists should be represented there. So thanks to their sponsorship, I was able to curate. I probably should have checked. I think I had 14 artists, something like that. And we had 6 screens. So there was quite a bit of screen time for each piece. I think we had 21 pieces total for the 3 days. And yeah, it was a really great event. I was pleasantly surprised with the turnout because, it wasn't during any other NFT event. So I kind of hung out around our area most of the time, and I had a lot of conversations with people who were there looking at the art, checking out the QR codes and asking questions like, what is this? What, they knew what the art was, but like when I go to this place, like where, on object, they're all on object, like, what is this? And having that conversation and yeah, it felt good. It felt like it was kind of getting us out of our bubble, which we tend to very much be in, and it can feel like an echo chamber sometimes. So yeah, I think it was also really good for the community because, it's been a little rough for a while. And I think it's really like crucial to kind of make those new connections and also, solidify older ones and kind of remind ourselves like what we're doing here. What is the purpose? What is the point? It's about more than, hype or even sales. Like we're trying to build something here. And I think events like Subjective are really crucial in pushing the space forward and helping, the people who are doing that to stay connected to it.
So in terms of the people who were actually coming to check out the art, on the assumption that Subjective is made up of a community of Web3 artists, is that right? Or are they just digital artists in general?
So Subjective is put on by Doten, who is an artist, but also owns Loom. So he has a production team. Loom works with Web3, but they also work with really big brands in that space. So they're doing productions all the time. But this event was specifically for Web3. It was the first one that they've done. They did our event, but we paid them to do that. Their event, produced by them, organized by them. So yeah, that's what they were doing.
And so in terms of, breaking out of the echo chamber and some of the people that you got to speak to throughout the event, what were the sort of conversations that were being had? Like, what were people aiming to understand about like the Tezos art community, or whether it was just, I guess, like the blockchain ecosystem overall?
Well, like there's the standard questions of I try to like avoid the NFT conversation. Often you go there and people kind of check out. So keeping it more in like there's a digital art movement happening. This is where you find it. These are all artists from all over the world and they're able to be here because of this and that. And people are definitely interested. I think, a lot of the conversations I have are with people who aren't artists. Like there were real estate investors there and just like, random people who were getting like seeds planted. You just never know like when it might grow into a new Web3 collector or something. So yeah, there was a lot of conversations like that. And then obviously a lot of conversations with people who are already in the space. I think, events like that are such a great opportunity to build partnerships with people that you wouldn't necessarily connect with. So who knows what will come from that.
And then in terms of, the actual curation of the Tezos artists that came to be involved at the event, what went into that process when you started trying to, filter through like the massive art community that Tezos actually has?
Well, first of all, I always say to people, I'm not a curator. I'm really not a curator. I'm more of a community organizer than a curator. So when it came to like choosing, essentially I did an open call. I didn't have a lot of time. The lead out time, I think I had about 2 weeks kind of thing between when I had to get the art to them and when everything was kind of confirmed and when I knew, because I didn't know how many screens I would have and all this sort of stuff, right? So everything was a little bit last minute, which tends to be the way things happen around here. At least that's been my experience. So I did an open call and really I did that because I wanted anybody to be able to be in it. Like, you don't necessarily have to be my friend. Obviously, if I know you got a good chance because I might think of you, right? If I don't know you, though, I want you to have an opportunity. So I didn't have time to search through the depths of object looking. There were some people who I just knew should be there, people who've been in the ecosystem for a long time, people who are well known, people whose art to me like really stands out, like Violet Bond, for example, and Lawrence Fuller, like they should be there. And then there were some people who were part of it that I didn't know at all, whose art was part of the open call, and I thought that it was great and it would be valuable there. And then there were some people too who I thought should be there for diversity reasons and for representation. So yeah, it's not always about the art. That's why I don't like to call myself a curator, because it's not for me always about the art. It's more about the community and that's really why I'm doing this. It's for the community. It's obviously not everybody gets to be part of it. I wish, everybody could be. We did a good job in the spring getting, 100+ people in, but for this one it was smaller. But I think overall, like showing that art on Tezos is just as good, if not better, than art anywhere else, is important. And we should be at every event like this. And you shouldn't be left out because your art is on Tez.
And I also think that when it comes to trying to, and to use a word that I know you don't want to identify with necessarily, is like to curate this community of artists, it's very difficult to get a representative sample, or at least a small representative sample of an ecosystem that is so big, because I guess like the blessing and the curse of the Tezos art community is that it's so abundant, but you need to know where to look to find it. So if you're not sort of immersed in the Tezos art community, you're not necessarily going to get that immediate exposure to it unless you're attending events like this and I guess experiencing them for the first time. So was there, like, did it kind of reflect anything back to you when you sort of selected the artist, but you also saw what was coming in the open call in terms of where the Tezos ecosystem stands today on the art front? Like, is the activity still, as high as ever? Has it dwindled a bit? Like, what's the ecosystem currently looking like? What's the morale across the artistic community?
Well, my open call was actually not super well responded to, but I am always being punished by Twitter. So that's not a representation of Tezos. It's a representation of my Twitter being locked down, basically. So I'm sure there were a lot of people who didn't see it. But I mean, there was more than enough to choose from. I think a few months ago, if you'd asked me that question, I would have said, it's not what it was. We're still not back to where we were. I don't know. I'm unsure if right now Tezos feels better because we've been doing better or because everybody else is doing so much worse that our like just sort of plodding along like at a normal pace where it's just kind of like calm, feels like this is a winner. Although I did say the other day, somebody was talking about, there was like some Twitter thread about how, platforms are shutting down and all of this, it feels like doom and gloom in other places, but Tezos kind of feels the same. And I said, who could have guessed that a ecosystem built on not hype and like more reality, like prices were more realistic, the reasons for buying was more usual, it made sense, like you understood who could have predicted that that would be sustainable. I mean, it is, right? Like we haven't really changed that much. Like the ethos that we came there with was still the same. We didn't come to Tesla thinking we were going to get rich. So, for the last year, nobody's been thinking anybody's going to get rich, not just on Tezos, anywhere. And a lot of people left because of that. But like, you didn't come to Tezos to get rich. So why would we be leaving now? It doesn't really make sense. So I would say that the overall sentiment is like decent on Tez. But I don't know. I mean, I think overall, if you look at the whole space, we're doing pretty good right now. It could be better, but we're doing all right.
I do think that there was a general sentiment, and this goes well beyond art, that I guess broader crypto's rebound wasn't as strong as everyone was predicting at the beginning of the year. And so while it has been a drastic improvement, that bullishness or like that energy or that aggression just sort of dwindled a little bit. But it's in speaking to some of the artists within the Tezos art community, what's become apparent is that there was almost a calm that brought. It was, like while developers were often thinking like, oh, we build in the bear market, artists were thinking it's actually quite nice to have a moment of silence and calm so I can just do my work without, the pressure of doing any artist drops or like pressure of trying to drive sales online from morning to night. And so I think it's allowed kind of this cultivation of new creativity in terms of people getting a little bit more experimental, people feeling less pressure to always be pitching, to always be selling, to always be exhibiting. I hope that that's still the case. I think there's like perhaps a quiet confidence that's growing within the Tezos art community. It's like through thick and thin, it's sort of always stayed buoyant. But are there any sort of new kinds of art that you've noticed recently? Like, are there newcomers to the space, or is it sort of like the familiar, friendly faces? Like, how is it growing, if at all?
I mean, I think there has been some new artists coming in, although it does seem like they're maybe like bigger artists being brought in by, entities that are kind of supporting and bringing them on board. I don't think like I did a lot of onboarding for the first 2 years. I mean, we onboarded a ton of people, and that is not happening right now. But it's very hard to onboard in this market where it's like before you could onboard and be like, initially, like when I first came to this space, I did not understand anything beyond the I could make money here, right? There was nothing beyond that. That's kind of like the thing that brings people in. And then you need to learn more. Like it's a learning curve. Like you don't get it right away. And I feel like right now, asking people to come in with little to no chance of monetary reward anytime soon is a tough sell. Like, it's a tough sell. So, but I think what you said, this quiet time is the time that the people who are here are building and making this like stronger foundation. And it's also like shaken out a lot of the scammy stuff, and the people who weren't here for the right reasons are gone. Like, they're all gone. They'll probably come back if the money starts flowing. Hopefully not. So I think that there is value in this quiet time, although it's been going on for a while. So like, it wouldn't be bad if there was a couple little upticks. I think though, like, events kind of break it up, and these exhibition opportunities that artists are getting, that means a lot to an artist, right? Like, even if you're not making money, to have your work exhibited in New York or Miami or wherever it is like a huge deal. It can make it feel like it's not, just you wasting your time on Twitter, for example.
I mean, I also wonder with the world being thrust into a pandemic for the last few years meant that this online community building was so much more natural and organic to us. And now we have the option to come back offline and then, as you said, display these works in physical spaces and have these people experience them out in the real world. It means it adds a dimension, but it also poses another challenge because the mechanics that NFT artists in particular became familiar with or became experts at is just not necessarily the most lucrative way to present their art to the world as it once was. And then I do think, yeah, as you mentioned, just like beyond digital ownership over their works and, whether it's royalty structures and what have you, the monetization element was a big draw for crypto artists. So what do you think would be, I guess, the main hook for them beyond that monetization? Like, what is the thing that's going to bring people back into the space if we were to start aggressively onboarding once again?
Well, I think that there's a lot of possibilities in terms of like how we're going to be able to use. I mean, we're seeing it already with platforms shutting down, and artists are starting to look at it and say, okay, maybe I need to be using this tech like on my own website. I mean, realistically, this gives artists a way to sell that we didn't have before. So like, once people understand that, I think there's a lot of value in that, and that could bring a lot of people in. But like, will it bring them into a community? I don't know. Like, I'm not sure that what we had in 2021 and 2022 will ever be replicated. Like, when we grow, it's not going to be like that. Like, once you get huge, you don't have this small community. I've said to a couple people recently who I met within the Tezos ecosystem, I'm like, it feels like this is a really small space, but it isn't as small as it once was. And there are a lot of people that, I come across who have a lot of followers, a lot of mutual friends, and I'm like, I've never seen you before. So I'm like, I think we are growing and we are bigger than we think we are, but also, yeah, that kind of, I think that foundational community that exists and existed are the people who will build what we need in order to onboard the rest, right? And I don't think, like, we're not ready for everybody right now. We're not. Everything is complicated. It's difficult to use things. I mean, Tezos is the easiest, but even getting people to like get a wallet, like even that step, right? And then I think, being able to take payment, like fiat payments, I think that's like crucial because so many people are scared of crypto. It's like you got to get them in the door with what they're comfortable with, and then you start educating them further, right? But like, that's all going to take some time. So I think in terms of like the tech just makes sense. I like things that make sense, and this makes sense to me. I feel I've said it from the beginning, like, I never liked collecting on ETH, with the gas prices, the way it worked. It just was so, it just felt counterintuitive. Like, it didn't make sense. Why would I be, I wouldn't use a credit card if every time I use it, I had to pay $10. Like, stupid. But with Tezos, like, obviously I didn't have that problem. So it's always been easier to like onboard and collect. And now we're seeing like ETH is, now we've got Rodeo over there where everybody's collecting things for 30 cents. And it's like, okay, is that is that where we're going? Wait, I thought Tezos was supposed to be the cheap art. Now we're expensive. Okay.
I mean, I think a lot of what you've raised is not unique to the art space. I think it's just across blockchain as an industry and crypto as an industry, whether it's trust issues, whether it's user experience, whether it's just all the friction points people have to encounter before they actually get to start interacting and transacting within Web3 domains and
Yeah.
like Web3 platforms. But I do also think it's interesting because I think these are kinks that need to be ironed out, whether it's art, whether it's DeFi, what have you. But at the same time, it's interesting that there's this sort of, it's almost like turning art into a bit of a vending machine that you can just like collect. Like you can put in 30 cents and then you get a quality piece of artwork out. So there's this, I guess, confusion in how the art space is maturing, because obviously like it's about concentrating value and like having these art pieces appraised as they rightfully and fairly should be appraised. It's not just about collecting something because it's cheap. So I think there's still a lot of learning curves to be had in that regard. But at the same time, we are still seeing institutions sort of jump in, and we are still seeing like the institutional participation. So like how do we bridge that gap between like the big art institutional names who are coming in and then the artists who are very much grassroots and trying to meet them where they're at?
Well, I mean, I think that there's been people who are doing that like relatively successfully. I think a lot of, the question, a lot of the brands that have come in were clearly just coming in for money, right? Like who is working on these teams that understand like what the potential is here and what's actually happening like beyond that like quick monetary gain? How do we connect artists with them? I mean, it's so easy to connect with people in this space. That is the best thing about it, right? Like you have access to all of the artists, the collectors, like they're all right there. You can message them. I mean, they might ignore you, but they're there. Right? So, I mean, I think that is a big difference between the traditional art world and this world. You sell a piece in a gallery, you have no idea who bought it, and you'll probably never speak to them. Whereas here, you get that connection. So, I think there's a lot of value in that. I mean, definitely for institutions, like having this sort of, turnkey community that you're able to come into with, this whole group of people who already understand what's happening is like super valuable, I think.
It also makes me wonder, because a lot of these institutions bring in already renowned artists and say, here's a new domain for you to present your work and to exhibit, like a new way to almost exhibit your work. So there has to also be a balance between raising the profile of the grassroots artist community and trying to recognize talent. And as you said, the connection shouldn't be that difficult. It's quite easy to connect with people online versus raising the profile of already established artists into new domains. So I would say, I think sometimes that's been considered a bit of like a contentious area, because they're saying, we don't need to uplift those that have sort of already been uplifted. It's about recognizing new talent in corners of the internet where, many people haven't tread before. So there's a bit of a tug of war that's taking place, because I think institutions provide a legitimacy, and they provide a lot of the functionality of the conventional art world that, crypto-based artists could really benefit from. But at the same time, unless it raises their ceiling as well, it doesn't really offer much benefit to the greater community if it kind of devolves back into this hyper exclusive, hyper curated niche crowd. So
Yeah.
how do we make this fair and equitable, and not just, in terms of giving any old artist a platform because they're unrecognized and they're new, but also just trying to, again, to use the word, curate genuine talent where it's often hard for them to find that spotlight.
Yeah, I mean, and even in this space, like I know Patrick Amadon made a tweet the other day where he made a tweet asking which artists are like the cure for boring or something like that. And then, all these people responded, and he said, it's really interesting that like none of the top artists were on this list. And most of the artists that were named are not people who get near the recognition they deserve. Like even in this space, there's a big disconnect between what's popular, what makes money, and what's, really like talent. Like I'm not saying that all of the people who are making money aren't talented, but like just because you're not making money doesn't mean you're not talented, right? So like, but it's the same in the traditional art world. There's who and your connections. I feel in this space and others tend to be the most important thing. Like if you're good at marketing yourself, you're good at selling yourself, like you're going to do way better than someone who's maybe, a way better painter than you or whatever. Like it's not just about talent. So that is like an issue that how do we get over that? Because we're human and we tend to, like we want to do business with people who we like. So like you just naturally like go for people that like those connections, obviously. But how do you make that equitable? Like you said, like I think that really like having open calls as part of, okay, you're going to bring in some big time artists. I actually think that's a good thing because it brings attention that we need, right? Bring in the big artist, but then do an open call and bring in somebody from this space, give everybody an opportunity to have a chance to be there as well. I think there are ways that we can do it in like a way that isn't going to anger everybody. I think that's, that too, because it is true, right? We have this great opportunity. We're going into some great museum and we're going to bring an artist who's never done anything in this space before and we're going to put them in. Like, get why people are upset about that. We have no lack of talent here. Like, I mean, there are artists in this space that absolutely blow my mind, who certainly deserve every opportunity, but they don't have that profile. So yeah, I think there are ways that we can do both without, disregarding one or the other. They both play important parts
But I
in
guess
growth.
the critical question kind of becomes like, where does the onus lie? Like who are we appointing as responsible and accountable for helping that happen?
Yeah, well, that is definitely a question because right now, as it stands, it's essentially the people with the money are the people who are making the decisions, right? Like they're the ones who are making the decisions of who's going to be seen for the most part at these big events. And, I'm not like criticizing them, but also that's like they're going to have their own lens, they're going to have their own biases and perspectives. So it's never going to be representative of the whole community, which is true for anything. So right now, it's the people with the money are the ones making the decision. And, I think if we take that into account, there are ways that we could maybe get around that. Like Tezos is still small enough that I almost feel like we could do some sort of like government type situation where there's like elected representatives that have a little committee and, the community can vote for these people and these people get to curate or whatever. Like, I think there are things we could do, but those companies who have the money and right now all the power, they're the ones who have to be okay with doing that. So are they going to be? I don't know.
And I think going back to your previous comment, like finding out that your talent, and as talented as you may be, may not necessarily be the thing that pays you as an artist, and it is, the marketing, it's the exposure, it's the connections, the relationships, is a challenge. So what are some of the tips that you would offer, let's say a newcomer to Tezos, someone who has a lot of art, they've understood who the Tezos art community are, they want to get involved? What do you think they should do?
Well, I think like what artists need to realize, unless you're working with a gallery who's just going to do everything for you and take a big chunk of money to do it, then you are an entrepreneur. Like you have to be the business person. And if you don't run the business part of your art career, it's not going to happen. It doesn't matter how good you are. Like, and that's the sad part because a lot of artists don't have that. they're just not aligned to that. They don't have that mindset. Like they're creatives. They don't necessarily have a head for business. So I see a lot of people who struggle with that. For me, I'm a photographer who's had a commercial studio for many years. So like I had an advantage because I have been doing all that stuff already. So even though it sucks that you have to do it, you do have to do it. So people come in here and they think, my art's amazing, it's going to blow up. Well, if it suits the taste of the collector demographic that we have right now, which is very small and, kind of, they tend to like similar things, which doesn't necessarily match other places, right? Like outside of this space. So if you fit in that, you might do well. But for the most part, people have to work and hustle here, just like in the real world. If you're building your art career, you're building a business, it's the same thing. So it isn't easy, but it also, like, I see this as another opportunity to be seen and reach a new audience and really, like, for me, I live in a road in New Brunswick. Nobody knows where that is. There's something above Maine, and that's where I live. So there are really hardly any. The galleries that are here sell riverscapes. Like, people would never, everybody knows who I am here, but nobody has ever asked to buy my art here, right? They want my nice pictures, I'll take of them, but they don't want, naked people or people in a slaughter truck on their wall. But like people in New York, they might. People in LA, they, like having the ability to reach people. For most of us around the world that don't live in these big cities and don't have connections like that, that's invaluable for artists all over. And it gives them opportunities that we never had before. Even if you're selling your art for small amounts, like selling it for small amounts. So for most people who live in little areas, like you're probably gonna have to work a lot harder for a lot less. So we were because of 2021, we had these like insane expectations. There was no way we weren't coming down from that. Like, there was no way. How do you come back from that, right? I'm like, oh my God, all these photographers I know are making hundreds of thousands of dollars all of a sudden. Like, there's this mad rush, but that was never going to be sustainable or reality, right? But what is reality is this is a new marketplace with a lot of freedom for artists. It's allowing us to, like, collaboration is huge here. I don't know if there's ever been a time in history where artists have been able to collaborate in this way and are on such a large scale, right? With people all over the world. Like, I've collaborated with people on the other side of, the continent. Like, when could I have done that? So yeah, there's a lot of value here. It's just maybe not as obvious as it was before. You got to dig a little deeper.
And I guess not as inflated as it once was, because I think it's a refreshingly pragmatic take. I do agree with you that we can't basically aspire to what was effectively an anomaly when it came to the market in 2021. We need to sort of not necessarily create a more modest expectation of what this art domain is going to look like or how it's going to develop, but more a realistic one. And I do also really agree with the sentiment that, like, your passion may be art, but there is going to be a lot of work that goes into showcasing your art that just isn't as fun, isn't as exciting, but is going to be the thing that gets you that exposure. And it's about branching out and like finding new audiences and doing, frankly, a lot of the grunt work that I guess most of us wouldn't want to bother to do if we didn't have to do it. That all being said, I'd love to round out the conversation with generally asking what you're working on next. Like, what have you got in the pipeline and what are you excited about for the rest of the year?
Well, personally, I've been working on a lot of art. I have two series, 11-piece series that I just finished up, that I really want to mint on Tezos. And I've been reaching out to some people in the ecosystem because what I need is to be able to put multiple files in one NFT. Because it's a series, I want collectors to have the whole thing. Like, it doesn't make sense if you just get the middle one, for example, or the end ones, because it tells a story. Each piece is part of the story. So figuring out like a way that can be done, ideally on Tezos. So I'm kind of working on that right now. And I also have a couple collaborations. I did one with Lindsay, Infinite Mantra, in my bathtub in the studio. I put her in her art, and this, I really loved doing it. Like, it wasn't technically her art, but it was inspired by her art. And I think that's something that maybe I want to do more of. Like, now that I have so many friends in this space and, artists who I really love, photographing them, but being inspired by their artwork and creating artwork with them in it makes a lot of sense to me. So I've been doing those two things. And I'm going to Miami in a few weeks, I guess, or well, a month. We got it in a month. I don't know what I'm doing there yet. I've been trying to see if I could put something together, but I haven't had a lot of luck on venue, but it's still kind of up in the air, so I'm not sure. I know there's a lot of Tezos things that are going to be happening. I don't know the details on those yet, so hopefully I'll be involved in some way, but I'll be there regardless, so at the very least I'm going to the beach.
I think it's a vast improvement from, the incoming cold. And I love the idea of, like this fusion and this collaboration with the other artists that you've met over the last few years. Where can people sort of follow all of your work, if not, on Twitter?
Well, yeah, nobody can find me on Twitter, but really, I'm like locked down there. But I am on Twitter and Farcaster under my name, but you won't find me. You literally will not find me, so I won't even tell you to search me. But you can go to my website, and on my website that'll like direct link you to me. On my website it's just victoriawestportrait.com, portrait with no S. And yeah, you can email me, Victoria at victoriawestportrait.com. And yeah, find me on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. I'm all over the place.
Awesome. Well, Victoria, it's always a pleasure, and thank you so much for your insights. And, best of luck with Miami, and if anything, enjoy the beach.
Yeah, thank you so much.